Thank you for joining us today for the virtual Sunday service with the Center for Creative Living. I'm Reverend Dr. Ayleen Augustine, President of the Universal Church of the Master. Founded in 1908, UCM has held as its foundation that just as many rivers lead to the same ocean, each person's unique spiritual path is to be honored and nurtured. CCL, a charter of the Universal Church of the Master, has served and supported the spiritual needs of its community here in the Bay Area for over 20 years. Now, with a special welcome, the head pastor of the Center for Creative Living, Reverend Doti Boon.
Good morning, and I want to wish you a very happy Easter and a very celebratory Passover. This is a time for so many religions to be celebrating their faith. And on the 24th, we'll also be starting Ramadan. So as you can see, the three great religions are all coming together in a very short period of time. However you honor or celebrate your religion, know that it is important to carry you through these difficult times. Through faith do we make it. Don't you agree that with your faith you can feel better about what's going on in the country, what's going on in the world? It's something you can lean on. And here it's a Center for Creative Living. We want to give you this opportunity to lean on whatever faith you have, or accept them all, like we do here at our church. We're so delighted to have you join us, and we have lots of different things coming up. We have a wonderful talk by our Reverend Mary Garry with the Center for Infinite Growth. We have James Knight joining us today with a song he has written for this occasion. Reverend Annie Corbin is going to be doing a prayer. And of course, our Reverend Janet Child is going to be coming in to see us. We have so many wonderful things happening, and we want you to stay with us for the next 45 minutes to an hour and listen to the words and the music of these incredible people. Now, I have a gift for you. This is my Easter gift to you. Many of you know I'm a psychic, and I would like to give you one free question. In other words, call and ask me a question about what you can be doing during this time, or what's happening in the future, or something you may want to discuss in the past. And just call our office, 408-392-9090, and say, I'd like to ask Doti a free question. And you know what? I'll be getting back to you. I may not be the Easter Bunny, but I'm somebody that wants to give you a gift for these holidays. And now let's start our program.
Now we will have our opening prayer with the Center for Creative Living's Associate Pastor, Reverend Ann Corbin.
Hey everyone, happy spring, happy Passover, and happy Easter. I hope you all had a good week. Mine started off very interesting when I had to struggle with the electronics in my living room for a couple of hours last Sunday. The cabinet is permanently affixed into the area that would have been my fireplace, and the person that designed it made it just deep enough that I can't reach any of the plugs on the wall back behind the cabinet. But there was this high-pitched sound coming out of what I thought was my television set, and I couldn't make it stop. So I asked the maintenance person at our park to come inside and unplug everything for me because his arms were longer than mine are, and I kept a great distance from him while he took care of that for me. After he left, I sat down in frustration and thought I'm not going to have any entertainment while I'm staying at home. But then I remembered that I do. I have the TV in my room. I've got the iPad. I have my cell phone, which has lots of songs on it. I have computers. I have CDs that can play in my computers. There's just no lack of entertainment. So I started to brighten back up again. And what I recognized was that fell right into place with the lesson that I've been working on, which is to remember that when I'm feeling down, in order to lighten up, to find the blessings attached to what just occurred and to find an attitude of gratitude. And I found it pretty fast. And right now, I'm feeling grateful for all of you. So let's take a moment and take a nice deep breath in, breathing in love, joy, abundance, and gratitude. And let's breathe out anything that is not what you want to feel today. And you can take all of those items, any feelings of illness, any feelings of lower energy, and you can put them into the virtual bucket that sits right next to you. The Creator knows what to do with them, so you don't have to ever take them back. You can just leave them there, and you can keep adding more if you wish. Now take another nice deep breath in and out. Dearest Mother, Father, God, we thank you for protecting us and keeping us whole through this ordeal. As we celebrate Passover and we celebrate Easter in the springtime, we know that you bring to us the opportunity for renewal. That's what this represents. And we know that your love will keep us going. You protect us from the cold. We have the blessing of technology. We have the blessing of everything that you bring to us. The love, the light, the joy. And we know that even when we're struggling, you help us to find the blessings. So as we start this day and we welcome our wonderful speaker, we know that we can start anew at any time and we can begin again because you are always there supporting us. You are always giving us your love and your light. And we thank you for that. So let's give thanks for a wonderful day, and let's give thanks for our wonderful speaker today. And most of all, thank you to you, Creator, for being with us all the time. Namaste. Blessed be. Amen. And so it is.
And now, a guided meditation and music with Reverend Dr. Janet Childs.
We are better together, weaving a path of love, creating a web of healing, a bridge between earth and above. On the wings of the Spirit, we ride our way back home, and the dove holds us close to our heart, and we're not alone. Our history of struggle, memories flowing downstream, we are held in the sacred arms of the world's dream. better together, weaving a path of love, creating a web of healing, a bridge between earth and above. We know that we are held in this unbelievable, unknowable truth, that we are meant to join hands. We are meant to reach out. We are meant to build our communities stronger, deeper, richer, and truer. In these times, my friends, we are being called forth to be that weaver, to create those pathways of love and harmony. Imagine that you are a weaver. What are the threads that you bring to the sacred loom? This is our home. This is our time. Allow yourself to feel the strength in the strands of the energy that you bring to the loom of our world. Know that your unique color, your unique thread cannot be repeated by another. And so, take this moment now to breathe in deeply and know that you are a sacred weaver. That in this spring season, we can heal and transform what is around us by being that healing energy. That unique strand of light that you offer to the world's weaving. And just allow yourself to feel the weaving with others around you. And just know that each of us, as we step up to this season of beauty, of tranquility, of healing, in these most challenging times, let us begin our weaving. Let us feel it, let us know it, let us be it. And so feel your thread becoming connected with all other workers of light. We are building a powerful blanket of healing, comfort, strength, and love. We are better together, weaving a path of love, creating a web of healing, a bridge between earth and above. On the wings of our knowing, We carry the light on this moment of our being. We take flight. We take flight. Our history of struggle, memories flowing downstream. We are held in the sacred arm of the world's dream. We are better together, weaving a path of love, creating a web of healing, a bridge between earth and above, and above. And we weave, and we fly away, and we reach inside in the deepest way, and we hold all that is sacred and bring it into the dawn. And we are knowing, we are holding, we are reborn, reborn, reborn. We are reborn, reborn, reborn. We are reborn.
And now, our featured talk, a celebration of Easter.
Good morning and happy Easter. As they told you, my name is Mary Garry, and I must say it's strange not to have you out there with me, sending me your energy. So I'll just ask you to send it to me from wherever you are tuning in right now, during or after, it's all fine. Before there was Easter, there was spring. And before there were printing presses, there were stories. Before there were cathedrals, there were gatherings, whether they were in homes or around the fire, because we're a social people. And people that are, I don't know, some people would call us a herd, but we belong together. We do better together. We have more energy together. And I think that's one of the challenges of being sheltered, as we have had to be for the last couple of weeks here, and will have to be for the rest of the month, for sure, maybe longer. But all of those things are okay. One of the things that we're particularly lucky in, and I wanted to acknowledge it in my talk, was the fact that we have our grandchildren supporting us. Our grandchildren are in our little townhouse with us and sharing the space and doing the shopping, and our grandson does a lot of the cooking, and so we have been nurtured in this space. And part of what I want to accomplish with today's talk is to help to encourage you to create some nurturing in your space. But I think it's so interesting that the universe created this. The universe created this all over the world. How likely is it that all over the world at the same time, people have to be clustered in their own homes? People have to be turned upon themselves to draw their sustenance and their guidance and to be closer to their family. and all the things that were so important to us before, our job, our projects, our whatevers, have to be put on hold or be done remotely. They just don't have the same importance as they had in the past. And that's just fine. So let me move on to solstice. Well, it's not solstice. Shame on me. Solstice is summer and winter, and equinox is spring and fall. And this is the spring equinox. This is the time when light and life returns to the land. We forget sometimes how we're an evolving people. There was a time in which we gathered by the fire, or we sent the hunters out to hunt and the gatherers out to gather. And then somebody figured out if we planted the things we like to gather best, we could gather a lot closer to home. And pretty soon that villages began to develop. And in the villages, the group nurtured each other. And in fact, the most painful potential thing was if the clan put you out. If you were set outside the circle because your behavior didn't work inside the circle. But the community allowed specialization. So the best hunters hunted, and the best farmers farmed, and the best cooks did the most of the cooking for a celebration. And the people who had talents, like an artist, each village had an artist. Each village didn't have a Da Vinci, but each village had an artist. And so they were able to have a piece of that. And all of that was wonderful. And that sustenance is the part of recorded history that goes back probably about 5,000 to 7,000 years. And then there was a whole time there in which we then began to make ourselves in tune with our environment. That's the time in which elementals and fairies came into our lives, where we said, oh, not only does the world have a resonance, isn't it wonderful that spring comes and decides to sustain us again? Those sustenances are energized by other beings or other light energies that come around them. And so there was years, thousands of years, in which the inspirational element of people's lives was tied to their connection to the earth and to each other and to the beings that they saw. And then they began to give a higher rating to some beings, and they became their inspiration, and then they became the kitchen god and the hunting god and all of those. And that took place and continued for thousands of years, probably 5,000 years. And then a man named Abraham was born. And Abraham was, people lived longer in those days. At least that's what they say. I assume they knew how to count, and they were hundreds of years old, some of them. And so as he was maturing and living his life, he was awed by the synchronicity of spring and the flowers and the buds of the trees. What differentiated Abraham from the other people was he began to think that it was more than just the cycles of the earth, that there was someone who had developed it, set it in motion, and that there was a force that was very probably a single force that was creating and sustaining life as we knew it. And that was the beginnings of the development of monotheism. There is a single force that is guiding the universe, a divine source, so to speak. That concept was not welcome at the time. They had their gods, and they liked their gods. And, if Abraham wanted to have this guy be one of the gods, that would be fine. But they weren't ready to give all the rest of them up. And Abraham was chased out of some places. His followers were sometimes attacked, sometimes hassled. The concept, however, had to have been, in my view, energized by the God force, because people were drawn to it, made sense to people. They were excited by thinking that there was a God. And so Judaism was the first of the monotheistic religions. Christianity and Islam followed, and they all see themselves as coming from Abraham. But the first and long-lasting monotheistic religion was led and founded by Abraham. One of the things that happened with Judaism is that they were primarily living in Judea, but something always happened. There were wars at the time, and different countries would come in, and they would be stronger, and they would take over the country, they would take over the land, and the Jews would be pressed out of their land and then would have to return to it. An early thing that happened was that probably 2,000 or 3,000 years into Judaism was the time in which Joseph was the favorite son of the father, and his brothers were angry and disappointed, and so they packed him up and sold him to a slave trader, and the slave trader took him to Egypt, and he was in jail, actually, in Egypt when one of the other inmates, I guess they were called inmates in those days, had a dream that he couldn't understand, and Joseph interpreted the dream, and it was correct, and the inmate was very excited, and the inmate was ultimately released from prison and was serving the Pharaoh, and the Pharaoh had a dream of I think many have heard of the dream, the 7 fat cows and the 7 lean cows, and nobody could interpret the dream, and this fellow remembered about Joseph in jail, and so they went and got him, and he interpreted Pharaoh's dream as 7 years of plenty, followed by 7 years of famine, and that Egypt needed to build granaries and set aside the grain so that the people could be cared for during the 7 years of famine. And his analysis proved very correct. Egypt became quite a power in those days because it could sell grain to places that had none. And so Joseph was well beloved by the Pharaoh and the people of Egypt at the time. And so more Jewish people were coming into Egypt, and part of those who came looking for food was his family, his father and his brothers. And so he paid for their food, and then the brothers came to thank him and say, why are you doing this? And he said, don't you remember me? And it was like a grand reunion, and the Jews were a happy element of Egyptian history for quite a long time. But the Pharaoh that had the dream died, and the Pharaoh after him died, and by the third Pharaoh, the Jewish people were unusually successful in Egypt and had obtained a great deal of money and resources, and the Egyptian people were jealous, and the Pharaoh was jealous. And so they simply declared them not landowners anymore. They took possession of all their property and made the Jews slaves. And the Jews were slaves for many years in Egypt. And we all know the story of Moses, who was born of a slave woman in Egypt and put in the basket and rescued by the sister to the Pharaoh and raised in the palace. Ran off when he knew he was a Jew, and he saw how the army was treating the slaves, and he was so angry at one time he killed a soldier. And so he had to leave Egypt. He escaped Egypt. And he continued his prayer work with his wife and family and his farm. And then God began to speak to him again and say, you need to go and get my people out of Egypt. This has gone on too long. The Pharaoh needs to be told to let our people go. So Moses went back to Egypt, was recognized by first his mother and then the Pharaoh, and entreated the Pharaoh to let the slaves go. They've been slaves for far too long. And the Pharaoh said, well, no, they do our work. They do our economy. I'm not turning these people loose. And so God, through Moses, brought plagues upon Egypt. And first, Moses would tell them, this is the plague that was coming. The first one, I believe, was locusts. There were 10 plagues. And the Pharaoh was angry. The people were frightened. but there was never enough to have Pharaoh release the people and let the slaves go. So God said, well, I'm sorry, this will be the final plague, and it's a serious, painful plague, and there will be crying such as you have never heard in Egypt. And what I'm going to send is I'm going to send on the mist a plague that will kill the firstborn son of every person, every family in Egypt. And however, I don't want the slaves to lose their firstborn son. So you, Moses, will tell them to paint on their door the lamb, the blood of a sacrificial lamb, so that the plague will know not to enter that house and will pass over it. Sound familiar? And so what happened is that the plague came. The Pharaoh relented and said he couldn't hold against the power of Moses' God, and said, get your slaves and get out of here. And so there was thousands and thousands of slaves, men, women, children. They had very little time to gather their belongings and leave with Moses in a trek towards Jerusalem or Judea. And so they didn't even have time for the bread to rise. So that is why they eat unleavened bread at the Passover meal. It's just that little flat, dry, not very tasty matzah bread. So they went and were going towards Judea when they heard the Pharaoh had been influenced by his wife, who entreated him to go after the slaves and to bring her Moses' head, and because she had offered herself to Moses and he had spurned her. And so the Pharaoh came galloping after them. I think we've all seen the movie. The sea parts. The Jews cross the river. The sea remains separate until all of the army is in the area between the two things of water, and then the sea returns and kills all of Pharaoh's army. Pharaoh is spared to tell the story and to go back and to explain the power of their God. And so forever afterwards, one of the highest holy days in Judaism is Passover. The teachings of Passover are that the families must gather together for that meal, and the fathers must teach the sons the story of the Passover. This was the first time that a God had intervened at this level inside the earth that we have recorded anyway. And so that is what made the Jews the chosen people, that God would do that for them. But then they, of course, owed their allegiance and their love and their devotion to that God. And that was part of the teachings when the Center for Infinite Growth was young, and Tom and I were younger. We used to have a Seder at our house. They have a Christian Seder guideline for Christians who wish to honor the Passover. And we did that every year for several years. People would come to the house and bring a dish, and we would share the cups of wine and tell the story, and the men would wear their little yarmulkes, and it was a wonderful celebration. And we shared it with them then, and we share it with them now. We believe that there is many paths up the mountain to God, and that Judaism is certainly one of the beautiful paths. And so one of the things that I think we sometimes forget is that Jesus was a Jew. He was born into the Jewish faith. His mother was a Jew. His father was a Jew. Well, his father was God, but the father who raised him was a Jew. And his teachings were the Jewish teachings. Now, he expanded them because Jesus was from the beginning of his teachings, was a very compassionate and loving man. He would be early to forgive you for infringing on someone or hurting him. as long as you were willing to go forward and be a better person. It was Jesus who told the story of the Good Samaritan, who said, look at this. This man was not even of the faith, and he stopped and cared for someone who needed help. That's the kind of work you should be doing. So Jesus was a very good Jew, and he had been teaching for 3 years or so, and it was coming Passover time, and Jesus sent Peter and John into Jerusalem because the rules at the time said you had to go to Jerusalem for the Passover, and then you were to gather with your family for the meal. You also were to gather with your making a sacrifice to the god, and at the time those were animal sacrifices. And Jesus was a believer in women, the power of women. There were many groups of women who followed him, who helped believe and teach his work, and he loved them. He loved his mother, and he was of the belief system that not a lot of prophets have, that women have a role in religion in the earth plane. So he gets to Jerusalem. We know the story. Last Sunday was Palm Sunday, where they all cut the palms from the trees and laid them in front of his path, and were cheering him and very adoring of him. And then he chose to go to the temple. The temple is where you go and you bring your offering to the gods. Well, what the temple rules were, run by the Pharisees, which were the leaders of one of the Jewish sects that had access to the temple, were that you were supposed to buy your offering there. And many of the women were widows, and they didn't have money to buy a lamb so they bought doves. And Jesus saw that they were, I believe we'd call it now, gouging the women, so that the price they were paying for the doves was higher than it should have been. And as Jesus walked through the temple, he became angrier and angrier, and he said, you have turned my Father's place of worship into a marketplace, and a thievery one at that. And so he turned over the tables, knocked the monies to the floor, which scattered and didn't get picked up for the Pharisees. Everybody grabbed their money and ran. Freed the doves, freed other of the animals, and in essence, cost the Pharisees a great deal of money for this Passover. And they were very, very angry. And so powerful people, when angry, can do some pretty terrible things. And what we saw was that Jesus went from the temple to where the Passover meal was, and he was sharing the Passover meal with his apostles. I'm sure with his family also, with his mother. And it was at the Passover that he said, one of you will betray me. It was at the Passover that he told them that his time had come. It was time. There had been a greater plan, and this greater plan was in place, and he was going to have to fulfill it. So after the meal, he went with Peter and John and James to Gethsemane and prayed. That was the hill where there was a lot of prayer work done. And he went and he prayed to God that, if possible, let's not do this. Let this cup pass from me. Not because he was afraid of dying. He was afraid he wouldn't be able to do it at the level that God wanted it done. And he cried out and called to God to help him. And God sent him an angel to be with him during his prayers. 3 times he went back to check on his apostles, and each time they were asleep. So he was disappointed in them. They had not yet received the Holy Spirit, and they were weak, as we all are weak sometimes. And so he was annoyed that woke him up, said, can't you just pray with me for one night, for one time? And this time the gates opened and the Roman soldiers came, and they were led by Judas, the treasurer of the apostles. And he had, you'll hear the story made a lot of different ways, but one of the stories that I choose to believe is that Judas believed that God had performed so many miracles that even if he identified them, Jesus, to the soldiers, that Jesus would just disappear, or it would all be fine, and he would use the money for a good cause. And it didn't quite work out that way. He came, and Jesus said to him, "Do what you have to do," and he kissed him, and that was the signal that this man was Jesus. And the soldiers grabbed him, and the story that Peter used his sword and whacked the ear off one of the soldiers. And Jesus picked it up and blessed it and put it back on his head and said to him, "Peter, Peter, those who live by the sword die by the sword." And encouragement to us, I think, to think hard before we go to war. And then Jesus was taken and tried before the Jewish religious courts, and they, of course, found him guilty. But because the Romans were ruling Judea at the time, they did not, the Jewish Pharisees did not have the authority to put him to death. So they took him to Pilate. We've heard the stories of Pilate. He went there several times. Pilate just said, I see no reason to kill this man. And, but ultimately he allowed them to choose at this time of the year, their Passover. They could free one prisoner and he would be set free. And he said, "These are your choices. Jesus, this man with whom I find no fault, or Barabbas, who was a known fighter and thief." And they all said, free Barabbas, as they were inspired by the Pharisees to do. And so Jesus was taken and scourged and crucified. I think it's of interest that at the foot of the cross were only the women. His mother, Mary Magdalene, the other women stood. But the disciples were frightened and they ran. They were afraid that they would be next. At the end of the 3 hours, Jesus was removed from the cross and went and was placed in a tomb found for him by Joseph of Arimathea, who was a Sadducee, which is a different sect of religious orders. Kind of the Catholics, it would be the Jesuits and the Franciscans, but here it was the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And so he placed him in the tomb that he had been saving for himself. And they wrapped him in burial cloths. And they went away quickly because it was nighttime and you were not allowed to bury in the eve of Passover. From sundown on, you couldn't do that. So then the Sunday after Passover week, Mary Magdalene took the oil and was going to anoint the body, and went to the tomb, and the master was gone. Jesus was gone. And she said, "How can this be?" The Pharisees were so afraid that the disciples would steal his body to say he had risen, because he said he was going to rise. He would come back and restore his body. And so they had a giant stone placed in front of it and guards hired to be there all the time. The guards had run away. The stone had been moved. And there was the wrappings of the master were in the tomb. Jesus spoke to Mary, I guess, in disguise, and said, "Why do you weep, woman? He is not here." And she said, "I do not know where they have taken my Lord." And so she ran back to tell Peter and the others, and Peter and John ran to the tomb. John, being younger, got there first, but he waited for Peter, and Peter went into the tomb and picked up the cloths and said, "He's not here." They still didn't know. They still didn't remember or connect with what he had said, that he was going to raise his body from the dead. So then they went back to the room where they were hiding, and Jesus joined them. But Jesus went through the wall, not through the door. Now I'm going to pause here for a moment because most of the people that are looking at this video and are affiliated with our church and Doti's chapter of our church, and there are people who believe in life after death. There are people who believe that energy is a huge part of our very existence. There are people who believe that, in fact, the earth is, everything in the earth has a vibration. And that vibration goes out and creates an energy field around it, which makes whatever it is visible. Some things vibrate so slowly that we see them as solid. But there are many others, and the more sophisticated and life-driven something is, the more movement within its vibration. And I would just ask us to think about the fact that it's not spoken of often, but in my belief system and Tom's belief system, we believe that you have the capacity to, by improving your very being, by trying to be better than you were yesterday, by remembering to call God to help you if you find you're stuck being better today than you were yesterday. I mean, if it was good enough for Jesus to call God, I think it's good enough for us to call out and say, help me to be a better person, help me to fulfill my desire, my promise when I was reincarnated into this place. Help me to grow. Help me to use this sheltering time to re-energize a connection with myself that busyness may have distracted me from. Let us use this time together so that we can enrich our very being, because we believe, Tom and I and others, and I hope you would consider, that as you believe, so your being is energized. And as your being is energized, it draws to it beings of the same nature. So that as you work to be a better person, you draw that out of other people, and people who are good people will be drawn to you. For it's when we come together for that higher purpose that we can do God's work. It's when we come together at that higher purpose, holding our own energy clear, reaching out into the energy of others who care for us, who love us, who also want the best things for this world around us, that energy multiplies and increases and allows right outcome to come into the circumstances. And if this ever was a time in which we want right outcome to come into the circumstances, it's a time when our country is divided. It's a time when people are dying for ways we have yet to determine as to how the virus works or strikes. That we think we understand something, but we don't actually understand it. And we have to move carefully but inspirationally forward as we solve these problems together. So that's what I ask for you in this holiday season, in this spring that has come, in the growth. I've heard more people talk about maybe what they're going to put in their yard are some vegetables. Maybe it makes a difference to eat your own food that you grow, and that helps your own energy to improve. It brings you special strengths to eat what you grow in love. I offer you this in love, and I'm going to close my talk now, and I'm going to close it with a borrowed paragraph. I subscribe to you, and I would recommend it to you. And Garry Springfield is a UCM minister. He lives in the Monterey area. But he has a wonderful monthly newsletter at no charge. And in this wonderful monthly newsletter, this time, Tom, can I borrow your glasses? I forgot mine. Thank you. This is what he said in his closing paragraph, and I would share it with you. The aura around you is the womb of your creation. When it is filled with love, light, peace, then dis-ease cannot come into you. If there is fear, worry, complaining, this creates a miasma, like clouds in the aura, that attracts suffering. It has always been so. But now it is ever more poignant and real. The perfect soul within you is your hope, your joy, your love, your prosperity. Connect with the divine more than ever with your daily spiritual practice, yoga, exercise, walks in nature. Pray and hold communion with the God being within you and the God being without of you, and be led into peace and plenty. Garry Springfield. Thank you, Garry. Thank you for staying with me. Thank you, my dear family, for supporting me in this. My grandson, you may have heard a little sound or two from our kitchen as he's preparing our meal. Bless you all this Easter, and I look forward to a time when we're together in body again. Goodbye.
Happy Easter, everyone.
Yes.
Say hi.
Well, that's fine.
Next, a musical performance by James Knight.
My friends, let us be still together and love on one another. Let us remember our source of strength, our source of hope is the divine spirit that guides us. That no matter the challenges life brings, Spirit will always love you. Let the kindness of Spirit inspire us all. Amen. Now let us join in song. Holy, 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 Creator Almighty, early in the morning our song shall rise to thee. Holy, 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 compassionate truly, angels and spirit, blessed energy. Holy, 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 healing completely. When we face our trials, what conquers gloriously. Holy, 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 Lord, darkness hides thee. All of united, blessing wonderfully. Holy, 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 how we adore thee. Your kind grace has no bound from earth to sky and sea. Holy, 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 faith and prayer evincing, perfect in power, and evermore shall be, and evermore shall be. Amen.
Thank you for joining us for this celebration of faith and fellowship. We'll be back next Sunday. And for those of you, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, you can leave them in the comments section. If you appreciate this video and the work that the Center for Creative Living is doing, please press like on the video. You can share the video. And also, please subscribe, because that will help this community and the church grow. Remember, in these difficult and challenging times, the opportunity to give and support an organization that has done so much for the community is tremendously important. Please help the Center for Creative Living continue in the wonderful work that it does. We will make it through this. We will be stronger for it. Our faith will carry us. Be blessed, be safe, and have a wonderful week.